Your Philadelphia 76ers may be back to being hot. Tyrese Maxey is back to playing like an all-star. Joel Embiid seems nearing a return, and this team has won 4 games in a row against some non-zero competition, I would say. The Cleveland Cavaliers, the Chicago Bulls, Los Angeles Lakers, and Sacramento Kings. I'm not saying this team is all the way back, but I'm getting close to there. So I'm here with my guy, Jacob Moreno, here to break down what is going right with this Sixers team this time, as well as talk a little bit about the NBA trade deadline, what the stance of the Sixers team should be, and everything else that you need to know. So, Jacob, after this 4-game stretch, 4 in a row, plenty to build off. Tyrese Maxey looking back, Joel Embiid inching toward it. Your number one takeaway from this recent stretch of play from the Sixers team is what?
I think it's honestly just as simple as consistency because throughout all the season, throughout all the losing, the mini win streaks, this team just lacked an identity, whether that was because of team culture, injuries, questionable rotations, disappointing performances from Paul George, Tyrese Maxey, etc. But like we are finally understanding what we're gonna see from this team night in and night out because despite being shorthanded, despite being on playing multiple sets of back-to-backs in this 4-game win streak, they've shown a type of competitiveness and fire that they really just haven't been able to consistently show us the entire season. Like you look at the game against the Lakers, Ricky Council playing his ass off,
Yeah.
snagging rebounds, like Kelly Oubre get into the rim, Tyrese Maxey lighting it up from all areas of the floor. Like this team is playing desperate basketball, which is exactly what you can ask for, especially considering their situation. Because now I believe they are straight up gridlocked with the Chicago Bulls for the 10th seed for the play-in tournament. So having just that type of consistent energy and mindset, it's so huge in this win streak. And I even tweeted last night. I mean, this like little like win streak by them is like completely changing my thoughts on what they should do at the deadline, which obviously we'll get into later on.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right there. And desperation is a great word for the way this team has been playing. And that was something that was missing at the start of the year. After they dug themselves this hole, I did not see that level of desire that I needed to see from the Sixers team, but it's here now. And the guy that I want to give the number one credit to this point, because I have been critical toward him for the larger part of the season, it's Nick Nurse, man. This team has responded to him basically calling him out, both in the locker room and to the media. That happening after that Denver Nuggets game. I love the quote from Kelly Oubre after the Lakers win, where they asked him what changed within the Sixers team, within the locker room. Why are you guys turning things around? And he basically said, we're sick of getting our ass kicked, so we're going to stop it. And that's what's going down. That has been the problem with the Sixers team. This has never been a situation where they're not as good as this team or they don't have enough talent to stack up. Sure, injuries have absolutely been a factor. We cannot brush over that entirely, but these have all been internal things. They have not played up to the level that they were capable of and need to produce legitimate results on a night-to-night basis, and we're beginning to see that. Now, as far as guys turning things around, I do want to highlight Tyrese Maxey, man. An unbelievable stretch for him. We're talking about 12 consecutive games with 28 plus points. Over this period, we're talking about him averaging 32.4 points per game, shooting 49.2% from the field, 34.2% from three, and I am confident that that number will continue to rise. He's looking like a legitimate all-star caliber talent. Now, granted, tonight will be when we see the announcement for those rosters. I think, unfortunately, it's more likely than not that his slow start is going to hurt him, and in particular where the Sixers stack up in the standings. But do you think he has a chance at cracking this all-star game? Should he? And what are you seeing from Tyrese Maxey of late, Jacob?
I think you could honestly say this 12-game stretch where he's averaging 28 or more points is probably the best stretch of his career.
Yeah.
And that's crazy to say considering this season, how it's going and how he started the season personally. Like he is just playing an exceptional level of basketball. I see 27.1 points per game, 5.9 assists, but I believe he's averaging even more than that in this recent stretch. Like
Yep.
he is really just back to being that aggressive, happy-go-lucky, like amazing, energetic player. Like he is lighting teams up at the rim. He's aggressive in single coverage. He's creating for others and drawing blitzes and doubles, especially in that Kings game last night. And we'll probably talk about this guy later, but he's developing some really good synergy with Eric Gordon, who's
Yeah.
also been phenomenal. Which Eric Gordon deserves a whole stretch later on. But back to Tyrese Maxey, he really just has been straight up amazing during the stretches, and his offensive production is honestly the biggest key to this win streak. In terms of him being an all-star, I mean, if you asked me 2 weeks ago, I would say there's probably other guys more deserving when you think of Cade Cunningham,
Yeah.
Trent Young, Tyler Hero, maybe even Dame. But I think at this point, with how he's bringing the Sixers back almost single-handedly offensively, that he definitely deserves consideration for an all-star reserve spot. So overall, if you would ask me, I think, yeah, I mean, when you consider, just the way he's elevated this team these past 2 weeks, I think him being an all-star reserve would be well deserved at this point.
Yeah, 100%. And my personal thoughts are, I think if this voting was stretched out like 2 weeks later, he would absolutely be an all-star. I think it's probably more likely than not that the slow start to the season from both Maxey individually and the Sixers team likely weigh him down when you just think about the amount of talent that is in this Eastern Conference and in the NBA as a whole. So we'll see what the votes are. Obviously rooting for Maxey and do hope that is the case, but will be interesting to see there. I love that you hit on the positivity from him because that has really been something that has stood out to me throughout the season. We know who Tyrese Maxey is as an individual, as a personality, that he has constantly been this smiling face, this voice of positivity in the Sixers franchise. And that really was not the case for the larger part of the season. There's been a lot of complaining to officials, flailing around on the court, arguing, just looking kind of miserable out there. And that has changed of late. And I do think that is directly correlated to the success on the floor. I'm not saying that Tyrese Maxey obviously being happier directly translates to him being better at basketball, but I do think that there is some sort of correlation there. And the point that I would kind of lean on here is think about the contrast in him and Jared McCain when they were on the floor this season. Now, granted, Jared McCain absolutely an outlier as far as positivity and expressiveness on the floor and all those type of things, but it was kind of strange to me to watch these two backcourt partners with this kind of being a calling card of Maxey as a personality and a player to be all smiles, to be positivity, and that looking so, I guess, just not even remotely in the same atmosphere of a guy like Jared McCain, who's bringing a lot of those same factors. Now, it is nice to see him returning. And even like last night, one thing that really stood out to me as like the game was winding down last night, they were just dribbling out the clock. It was not just like Maxey puffing his chest out. He's up clapping in the faces of all his teammates, like hyping them up. And it feels to me like he's starting to take on some of this real deal like leadership style to the Sixers team. Now, the Joel Embiid conversations we've had plenty of. The injury issues obviously being a factor. And by the way, do want to say I think it's kind of bush league, this stat flying around social media circles of the 446 game played, 400 games missed. To make a quick note here, he missed the first two entire seasons, which is 164 games right there. So a little bit of a disingenuous stat here, but nonetheless, to stick on Maxey for a little bit, I do think that he's developing into the guy that's capable of being that leader and franchise face in a way that, like, with all due respect to him, I don't think Joel has carried that torch in the way that has necessarily been the case. So are you seeing this kind of leadership growth as well, Jacob?
I think I am. I think kind of going back to your point about Embiid, they have two very different leadership styles. I
Sure.
mean, over the years, Embiid has never been the guy to like be shouting like with his teammates, never the guy to go very vocal in like huddles. But when you think about the quotes from his teammates throughout the years, they've all praised Joel's leadership. So I think he almost has a Kawhi type of presence as a leader where like he's doing things behind the scenes, he's uplifting them in practice, almost like when the cameras aren't on. So having, two leaders who lead in different type of ways, like Maxey being more vocal, being more lively, and Embiid being the more common presence, I think that's good because also I wanted to share because as we've seen throughout this poor start, Embiid with Marcus Hayes and all that, like he's been criticized a lot as a
Yeah.
player on and off the court. But I don't know if you saw this, but Jared McCain spoke to the media
Mm.
before the Lakers game the other day, and he talked about how Embiid was like one of the first people to reach out and FaceTime him after McCain got the season-ending meniscus injury. So I think that was a cool story, and it's kind of a good showcase of what Embiid does as a leader behind the scenes,
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right there. And if anyone can relate or be sympathetic to the injury standpoint, it is Joel Embiid there. So shout out to
especially
Joel.
meniscus.
Yeah, especially meniscus there, as he's dealt with plenty of those particular situations. So it was nice to see Jared McCain facing the media, speaking a little bit, just him being on the bench last night. I think those are good things for him to continue to be around this team. And obviously, there's I personally am sympathetic to. I think the mental grind of an injury is even more difficult than the physical grind. That he will go through the rehab, he will do his physical therapy, but with a guy like Jared McCain, who basketball has been so tied to his identity for their entire lifetime, it's kind of tough that it's just taken away like that. But obviously, the bigger picture is more important here. I'm glad the Sixers are taking the full priority to preserve his long-term future rather than rushing him back or anything like that. But was nice to see him physically on the court and just kind of around this team again. Now, you mentioned Joel. I'm optimistic that tomorrow is the day we see him again. Now, I'm not doing any reporting here. I'm not saying I know this, but connecting a couple dots, he's been around the team way more. The warm-up before last night's game is probably the most intense warm-up I've ever seen from Joel Embiid in his entire time in Philadelphia. We're talking live game reps going up till right before tip-off, like the team being announced and coming onto the floor, and Joel is still out there getting his workout in. It's impossible to kind of read between the lines or get what we know from the Sixers organization. It's 12 consecutive games that he has missed in this most recent stretch, but we do know he loves to compete against Nikola Jokic, and particularly when it is here in Philadelphia. So, Jacob, do you share my level of optimism that we might be seeing Joel Embiid on the floor tomorrow?
I think I do. I mean, like you said, what better team and player to return against than Nikola Jokic and the Denver Nuggets, especially in Philly, which is kind of fun. The jokes kind of write themselves. But
Yeah.
anyways, I think it will be a great game for him to return. Like you said, that warm up, he was practicing with some crazy intensity. Like he was putting up like game shots, like
Yeah.
fadeaways, stuff off the dribble. Like he looked really engaged, which is great to see considering, how much games he's missed, how rusty he's looked a few times coming back. So he looks sharp. And granted, it is just a little, pre-game shoot around, but I like what I saw a lot. And I think Joel Embiid would be returning, Nuggets aside, at the perfect time because this team has life in it. Like they're having some
Yep.
fight and desperation, and like we touched on, 4-game winning streak, a chance to extend it to 5 and surpass the Chicago Bulls for the play-in picture. I think it will be a perfect opportunity for him to return. But again, if he does return, Embiid has shown to be a little bit rusty his first few games back, and with the momentum that the Sixers have playing at such a high pace and pushing it transition, it's interesting to see how he would potentially fit back, especially in his first few games. But I mean, Joel Embiid, when healthy, is an MVP caliber player. When healthy, he is arguably the best player in the world. Granted, we haven't seen that much this season, but having a player of his caliber back would do wonders to, extend this winning streak and, develop some actual chemistry for the first time in the season, January 30th.
Yeah, 100%. Could not agree with you anymore there. And a guy that you also mentioned here that I do want to make sure we don't skip over, Eric Gordon, man. I can't believe that this dude still has life. I was ready to declare him completely washed, and whether the motivation is you need to get me to a contender to get me out of Philadelphia, or him just finding himself and want to compete on this team again, he's bringing something to this Sixers team. I mean, he pulled up from the logo, the catch and shoot three of four from downtown yesterday. Really, that 3-point shot has become a pretty reliable part of the Sixers offense. And while we have not seen much of him playing with Joel Embiid, you can see the vision of him playing off those catch and shoot looks, just being that floor spacer. And what's so crucial with Eric Gordon specifically, the 3-point shot opens up the entirety of his game, and more specifically, the deep 3-point shot that he wants to push defenders multiple feet behind the 3-point line there, and that's where the spacing starts to open all this up. The shots are falling for him ever since that wisdom tooth came out. So what are you seeing from Eric Gordon? And by the way, not just been good on the offensive end, competing far better defensively than I thought he was capable of at this point in his career. We're talking guarding LeBron James 2 games ago. So not sure that should be the full scale long-term plan, but what are you seeing from Gordon over this past stretch?
Throughout the whole month of January, I've just been tracking the stats. I think this morning I checked, he's shooting 41.3% from three, which is astounding considering the just straight up awful start he had to the season. Like you said, when Embiid comes back, hopefully Friday, we can finally get to see that pairing in full effect now that Gordon is finally hitting those threes. And like his floor spacing has been so crucial, right?
Yeah.
Just having someone who can pull up from the logo, just pull up from anywhere and just be such a great threat off the catch. It's truly just been the perfect fit in the starting lineup, especially in the stretch. Like I touched on, Maxey, when he gets doubled, like Eric Gordon just right there. Just he's been the Sixers' most reliable role player as a shooter, I think, in my opinion, in the month of January. And like you said, you can't talk about this without mentioning the wisdom tooth. Like
Yeah.
like it's just so funny because, but dealing with a wisdom tooth myself, like like the whole process is just hilarious,
Not
and
fun.
the jokes are it's crazy. But Eric Gordon, I don't think. I mean, if they're trying to win now, I'm sure we'll touch on this later. Like I wouldn't trade him at this point because you're not going to get a solid scorer shooting 41% from deep by just selling. Like he's really just established himself into a really consistent role player, which is exactly what the Sixers need. And you could argue that he was more consistent than Buddy Hield was in his entire Sixers tenure.
Yeah.
And, even if you decide to sell, you could probably get a second round pick for him. But overall, great stuff from Eric Gordon. Love what I'm seeing. Hope he keeps it up.
Yeah, and seeing the chat, shout out to Nick Kershaw chiming in saying drug test Kyle Lowry after last night as well. So Kyle Lowry's shown a little something left in the tank as well. And I will say, like as much as Lowry's been a point of contention or frustration in the larger scale with a lot of Sixers fans here, his playmaking brought something. He had 8 assists last night, and I really thought you could feel the difference, just the flow within the offense, the way the ball popped, the way there was movement, just having another guy capable of being a passer and knowing how to run an NBA caliber offense, I think was really helpful. Now, I'm against the concept that Nick Nurse seems really tied to of playing Kyle Lowry and Reggie Jackson together. But regardless, I'm not going to nitpick over that at the point of the bottom line being they've won 4 in a row. Now, another guy that I do not want to go under the radar here, Kelly Oubre Jr., I think in a lot of ways has been an unsung hero for this Sixers team. Just a guy who is one of those grab your lunch pail, do the dirty work type guys. And it's so funny to me because that is so far from his perception or his reputation coming to Philadelphia. So on the season overall, we're talking about averaging 14 points per game, 6.2 rebounds, 1.8 assists. The 27.9% from three is tough, but you really don't feel it out there. That this is a guy who's attacking the basket. It's become very clear that Kelly Oubre at his best, it's quick decisions, quick reactions, and B, straight line attack the basket. We've seen a lot of that lately, and particularly him using his strength. He's up there among the league leaders in finishing around the rim and in and ones added. He does a really nice job of attacking the body, particularly in transition or when he's just attacking the rim, finishing through contact, and then creating an extra look for himself at the free throw line. So he had 12 rebounds and 13 rebounds in 2 games this week. He's been a guy that has really pitched in and helping out with the rebounding, which has become increasingly important without guys like Andre Drummond and Joel Embiid out on the floor there. So what's your vision for Kelly Oubre when we talk about this team being fully constructed, and what have you seen from him during this shorthanded stretch?
Kelly Oubre is such a hilarious player because he'll have stretches like this, then he'll have stretches where he has posts like 7 points on terrible efficiency. But
Sure.
jokes aside, I do want to just shout out Kelly Oubre, like you said. Like he has just been so critical to their success in so many different ways. And when you show the stats, I saw a 27% from three, but like you said, you really don't even see it on the court.
Yeah.
He's probably shooting better from that range throughout this stretch of games because he really has just been consistent off the catch, especially from those corners. And that's huge considering the legend that we lost this summer in Nick Batum. But overall, I think Kelly Oubre has just really stepped up as the second scorer without Paul George and without Joel Embiid, especially in this back-to-back. And I like the fact that Nick Nurse is running a lot more pick-and-roll actions for him because we saw it specifically in that Kings game last night. I think it was a stretch like near the end of the third quarter where he was just hacking Sabonis off the pick and roll
Yeah.
relentlessly, and just his physicality, the way he finishes and draws contact, it's been unparalleled. It's been so crucial. And I've also noticed a little bit of mid-range game from him recently. Like he likes to, come off those screens and just hit a little like step back from like like a little below the elbow. But like that's a cool counter that I've noticed he's developing as well. Defensively, he's really setting the tone, especially, being able to get in those passing lanes, jar the ball loose, and just get out in transition. The one thing I will say with him in transition, he never sees a shot that he doesn't like. That
Sure.
man will attempt a layup on a 1v4 fast break if he had the opportunity to. But sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But overall, Kelly Oubre has been a big part in the consistency and the intensity that I appreciated in the beginning of this show. He's really just been excellent on pretty much all facets of the game, and I hope he can keep this up. And like we said, if Joel Embiid returns, I'm interested to see how his role changes. He'll probably, revert back to being that back cutter spot up shooter, which I think is honestly the best role that maximizes him the most. And depending on what the Sixers do with the deadline, I would love for him to, kind of embrace it all and kind of maybe, depending on who they get, maybe he comes off the bench and just does his thing as a scorer. So there's a lot of things you could do with Kelly Oubre, but his portability and scalability has just been excellent this season. I think it's kind of gone unnoticed, especially as, someone who's been fairly critical of Oubre throughout his overall time here.
Yeah, it surprised me that he did not strike me as a guy who would ever be, like, quote unquote, one of my guys. He's become one, man. I have a lot of tolerance for a guy who's willing to do the dirty work. Defensively, he's been pretty terrific all season. He's really got a knack for kind of just sticking his hand in on ball handlers, particularly on pick and rolls, where he's able to kind of get in between there and those kind of create turnovers. So he's been excellent. Shout out to Kelly, man. And he's a guy that is off my would trade list, that I want this guy part of the Sixers team pretty much in every single capacity there. Now, to get into the trade conversations a little bit, I would say probably the biggest topic of discussion is Gershon Yabusele. That this is a guy who has far exceeded expectations thus far in Philadelphia. To dive into his numbers here, that he's averaging 10.4 points per game, 5.5 rebounds, shooting 39.4% from three on legitimate volume, just shy of 4 per game, 40.9% from the corner there, 50.3% from the floor. He's 29 years old. We do know his story as far as the Sixers kind of gave him a second chance in the NBA after the heroic Olympic performance and him kind of scrapping his way overseas for a couple years now. He's been everything this team could have hoped for and more. There is no doubt in my mind that he is a perfect role player to have on a contending roster. Now, the other side of the coin here is it does seem unlikely that the Sixers are going to be able to retain him. And it seems that all signs are pointing to the contracts that other teams are going to be capable of offering him this summer. The Sixers probably are not going to be able to be matched that. So with that being said, Jacob, where is your mind at as far as weighing get the most out of him for this year and then deal with it in the future? Or would it be better to quote unquote maximize the asset and move on from him, get something in return at this current point?
I think for the rest of the season, I'm just gonna say nothing but bad things about him to tank his value so they can get back on the minimum. But for real though, I mean, Gershon Yabusele, like you said, I think he has been the best offseason signing. I mean, he's just been
Yeah.
so consistent. He's been everything the Sixers have needed as a small ball five, as a power forward, rebounding, short roll passing, finding cutters, scoring in the post, pick and pops. Like the Sixers have never had. I mean, you could argue Nick Batum, but they have never had such a versatile role big man before. Like
Yeah.
he really just is amazing. But I think we've talked about it before. Like it just all depends on the Sixers' direction at the deadline. Like if they want to win now, you keep them. The off season shouldn't matter. But if you're at a point where you want to sell or just kind of hang tight, then maybe you do consider like some offers. But I don't know. I would love to see Abu on this team, like for the long term, especially. But I don't know if that's possible. I mean, maybe his love of Philly will be that great for him to accept like a taxpayer MLE, which I think is like 5 million.
Yeah.
But like you said, teams will offer him more than that. Like I could totally see, probably talked about this before. I could totally see a team like the Wizards or Nets like offering him a bag and selling crazy high on him at the 2026 deadline, which is definitely possible. But I don't know. I think with the way the Sixers season's unraveling, Embiid could return very soon. They're on a 4-game win streak. They're tied for the play. I think you keep him here because at this point, if you want to sell, then I don't know. Maybe like Houston, if they want to offer Cam Whitmore and you really want to like, invest in future assets, that's something to explore. But yeah, overall, I would keep him.
Yeah, I understand the concept of taking phone calls, considering all options, looking at what the best direction is for the Sixers team. But I'm ready to put the conversations about tanking this season to bed. I'm ready to buy in on this team, whatever it is. And I'm not saying that I think this Sixers team is capable of winning a championship or this is the year that they get over the hump by any means. But what I am saying is to take a look at these standings as a whole here. I just don't see a world in which this team can bottom out to the point where they have a legitimate chance at getting that draft pick. Once again, we all know it is a top six protected pick. So if it is not within those top six selections, the Sixers don't get it. And whether that means, obviously going to the Thunder if it doesn't get it, the point being the worst case scenario for me would be that you try and kind of toe that line, get in to have a chance at a real draft pick, and then you get nothing. If this is a wasted season and you walk away with nothing at the end of the year, that is a brutal way to look at it as a franchise. And when you look at who's below you, with the Toronto Raptors, with the Brooklyn Nets, the Charlotte Hornets, the Washington Wizards, who've lost 15 consecutive games for the second time this season, they're not going to be as bad as this team. And this isn't even looking at the Western Conference with teams like the Portland Trailblazers and Utah Jazz. The point being here, there's a lot of bad basketball teams in the NBA, and while the Sixers have been far from great, I just don't see a world where they can get to that level when you have guys like Tyrese Maxey and Paul George on this roster. They're going to win too many games to really be in contention for that true, chance at a top pick there. So I say you go for it and see whatever you can. And for Gershon specifically, I think it's if you get through this year and he walks, you kind of got to live with that, man. I think it's worth keeping this guy around. He does seem to love Philadelphia. Him at the Eagles game was awesome, and I'm willing to roll the dice and deal with that problem when we get there. And there is a world where we have him and are relying on him as a high-level caliber player in the actual playoffs if they can get to that point. So I'm ready to put things to bed and to take a look at the schedule moving forward. Obviously, a 4-game winning streak. They play the Nuggets, they play the Celtics, they play the Mavericks, and then the Heat. Those are the next 4 games before the trade deadline there. So a wider scale conversation. Are you with me on the put the tank the season conversations to bed? And are there any trade deadline targets that you particularly have in mind with that being said?
I think it's an interesting question because we could say all this now, and then they lose their next 4 because that's honestly how the season's going. Like
Sure.
they'll get hot and then they just sputter down the standings again. But even so, I think they're in a position now where you really, like you said, you really probably aren't getting the 6th overall pick.
Right.
And if you punt the season for flexibility and draft capital and you fail to do that after putting last season, I don't know how said front office executive would still have a job. But I don't know. I think, trade deadline, I'm super interested to see the way they'll go. I think at this point, they either, are buyers or they just kind of sit tight and do a little bit of margins moves.
Yeah.
But I don't know. They definitely have the flexibility in terms of like contracts and draft capital to do something. So I think I'm gonna wait a few more like this stretch against Denver and Boston to kind of, you know, have some trade targets. But I think overall you kind of want guys who are gonna wanna or guys who are on the younger side who can contribute. I think the biggest thing for me is a secondary ball handler. Like, yes, we saw Kyle Lowry was great last night, 8 assists, 10 points, 5 rebounds, but he's not going to have that kind of production at this point in his career, unfortunately. So I think the biggest thing, there isn't really any great names, but just a guy who hopefully is below 30 years old, who can just, kind of set the table for the second unit, create for himself a little bit, just kind of having that backup point guard that maybe he can, start as well and kind of get Maxey some more off-ball look, kind of like how they had with James Harden and Kyle Lowry last season. So I think that's the biggest hole on this team. I think maybe if you want to invest in another cheap five too, especially with the games Andre Drummond has missed and how easily Adem Mona gets in foul trouble, especially going against those bigger teams. So yeah, I think honestly it's just about just rounding out the depth and having a playoff caliber rotation. But yeah, overall, that's kind of my take on that.
Yeah, I think I'm closer to the sitting on your hands might end up being the right decision here. And if you are looking for targets, which for sure you explore all options, you make phone calls, you see what's available. Where my mindset is you're not swinging to invest assets for a 1 year push. If you can get guys on a multi-year deal or a guy who could help you out next year as well, Keon Ellis, who I think is now officially off the radar as he's playing far more after the coaching change with the Kings, when deservingly so. He's awesome in basketball. But that was a guy that I had circled. It's like if you can bring him in for this season, then build off moving forward. That's the type of target that I have in mind here, but I understand the concept of just waiting. Like a guy like KJ Martin, who we talked about plenty as basically a human trade chip that they're looking to move him for whatever the missing piece on the Sixers team is. I'm totally cool with him staying post deadline, being a part of this team, finding some sort of role, and just running back the same process next year that he's got an option for next year. You can do the same thing, and then he's just a straight up expiring contract. So we'll see how things shake out from here, but I don't think that there's going to be as many notable moves in either direction as kind of either of us are hoping for. Now, with that being said, there has been some moving and shaking around the NBA. Jimmy Butler obviously being the number one guy. De'Aaron Fox being added to the list now is seemingly wanting out of Sacramento. We saw him play up close and personal last night. There has been some of the buzz of the Jimmy Butler Sixers connections. Now, I think there is a little bit more made about this than is the actuality, but did want to get your thoughts on it, Jacob. So do you have any world where you consider bringing Jimmy Butler back to the Sixers team? And in theory, if it came down to just straight up get off Paul George's contract and bring in Jimmy Butler, would you consider that?
I just don't think it's realistic enough to even entertain, to be quite honest with you. I mean, in a vacuum, if this was NBA 2K,
Sure.
I would consider it because one, if you get Jimmy Butler, Joel Embiid will be very happy, but also Jimmy Butler, as we've talked about on here, is a proven playoff riser. He's that facilitating playmaker that the Sixers desperately need, like we just talked about. He just kind of checks all those boxes, and he's also still a very solid defender at his age as well. I think you could argue that he fits better with Maxey than Paul George does in terms of being a guy who can, facilitate and generate him looks off the ball. And he also has great chemistry with Joel Embiid, as we saw in 2018, 2019. So I think even if he doesn't come back, which I think at this point, I don't think the Sixers will be dumb enough to not offer him an extension twice. But even if he does, you get all your salary cap back to, start again. So I don't know. I feel like it could kind of be a win-win. Granted, Paul George has been playing solidly in his last 5 to 6 games, but I don't know. I just haven't seen enough from him this season to be hopeful that he can have like great, like all-star caliber type of production for the next 3 years of this contract.
Yeah, I think if you're even considering this, the motivation is getting off Paul George's contract more so than it is bringing in Jimmy Butler. That's sort of the mindset that you have to go about it. To be perfectly honest, I'm not there with Paul. Like, it hasn't been great. I was hoping for more. There's no doubt about it. But I also don't look at him and say, like, this dude's completely cooked. There's no chance of it. I think there's a world where he, like, reduces to a really effective 3-and-D style player. And while he's getting a hefty contract to do those type of things, that's also a very premium skill set that wins games in the NBA. Like, that is one of the most like highly touted skill sets that you can find around the league. And PG still does that at a really high level. And like, I think the perception of him is a little bit more negative than he deserves, that I don't think he is remotely the issue with the Sixers team. And there's been a lot that has gone wrong. So while it hasn't been perfect so far, I'm totally willing to keep rocking with it. And I frankly think just getting involved in the Jimmy Butler just business at this point is a mistake for any team. And the Miami Heat, who have kept him under wraps better than just about anybody, they're kind of feeling the pressure of it at this point. So very curious to see how this resolved, but I don't think Philadelphia should be any part of the equation. And for the report that Joel Embiid is pushing them toward it, Joel, man, like as much as I love him, you should have no say in this conversation right now. You got to hold up your end of the bargain if you're going to have any sort of it. The Sixers franchise, to their credit and to Daryl Morey's credit, have done everything possible to put an actual caliber team around you. That is the team that you have, and you have not been on the floor for it. So I don't want to hear it from Joel without him, holding up his end of the bargain here. But nonetheless, I do think this is more kind of talking points, and we'll see. Any predictions for where either Jimmy lands or if there is a De'Aaron Fox trade?
I think I have a mega trade prediction actually. I
Okay.
don't know how realistic this is, but if De'Aaron Fox wants to go with the deadline, I can see maybe a multi-team deal where Jimmy goes to, say, I don't even know at this point, like the Warriors, and De'Aaron Fox somehow gets to Miami. Like there has to be multiple teams involved. I think Miami's a really good location for De'Aaron Fox because obviously the Heat are now looking to move on from Jimmy Butler for very obvious reasons. But then you also have De'Aaron Fox, a very, I think, underrated point guard still in this league, who can you could honestly have a solid little core between, De'Aaron Fox, Bam Adebayo, Tyler Hero, and now Khalil Ware, who's played amazing as
Yeah.
of late. I'm almost jealous because the Heat are kind of obsessing over that rookie, kind of like how we were a few months ago, and now we don't have that anymore because of meniscus. But
I miss him.
anyways, I think that would, yeah. But no, I think that would be definitely the best location for him. I think San Antonio is also a very interesting fit because I do believe San Antonio owns the Hawks pick, or is it the other way around?
I think San Antonio owns it, but I'm not certain about that.
Oh yeah, it was the DeJounte trade. That's right.
Right.
That's right. But like, imagine trying to stop a De'Aaron Fox Wemby pick and roll. That just sounds like an absolute disaster for any defense. I don't care how elite it is. So I think those are two really interesting locations for him. As far as Jimmy Butler, I mean, I don't know. I think the Warriors, like they've reported that they're not trying to like waste all their future assets on a win now move, which I don't know. Maybe that factors them out of the equation. But like, I think maybe like a I don't know, like a Bucks type of swap. I don't know. Like, there's really no great option for him. I think Houston is the best one, but again, I don't think it makes sense for them to break the bank on all their young prospects
No.
because they have a great thing going on right now. And as far as Memphis fit, I just don't see it personally. I know like a lot of people like it, but like think about it. You're gonna have Zach Edey, Jimmy Butler, and John Morant on this. The fit is just so clunky because John Morant, for as amazing, like he's not gonna thrive being off the ball, and neither is Jimmy. It's two ball dominant guards. And I don't know. I just think it's a really awkward fit. So I don't, truthfully, I really have no idea how this Jimmy Butler situation plays out.
Yeah, I think that's what makes it difficult is I don't really see the clean fit anywhere out there either. That you look around the league and there's as great as Jimmy Butler is, and I'm not disputing the talent, there's just not like the clean cut fits. And he is a unique style of basketball player because of the sometimes unwillingness from the perimeter for him and how ball dominant he is, and as well as him showing some disinterest at time. Like I get this obviously was bubbling under the surface for a while, but I remember watching Heat games at the beginning of the season where he straight up looked disinterested in playing, where he's just going from corner to corner. There's a lot of baggage that comes with him, and I think every team should be cautious. I think if a team is going to take the risk, while I agree with you in principle, like the basketball fit with like the Memphis Grizzlies, I could see them making a move of just we're gonna get one season of possessed playoff Jimmy Butler. Let's take a chance on this and then see what happens from there. And I think honestly, whoever team does this, like that would be the route I go about it. Is we're not guaranteeing a contract. We're gonna bring you in for one season and see what happens from there. And the worst case scenario, if you walk, we can live with that. And I'll also say, I think for this specific situation, I think there's a higher likelihood than just about any other that I can remember that Pat Riley just calls the Jimmy Butler bluff. That he says, all right, well, we're not dealing you, man. Like, we don't have anything. You can keep causing a scene, causing trouble. We'll keep suspending you if you want. But the bottom line is if we're not getting value back, we're not just going to hand you off. I could see that happening there. There's still, I mean, the deadline rapidly approaching about a week at this point. So who knows what happens until then, but it will be very interesting there. Now, to shift it back a little bit to the Sixers, do want to talk about some of the young guys that I think have really been stepping up. So Ricky Council IV and Justin Edwards kind of highlighting things. Do want to talk specifically about Justin Edwards. This is a dude who was kind of an interesting pathway, that he was highly regarded as a recruit, went to Emotep Charter here in Philadelphia. Guy got a chance to check out in high school, and watching him play in high school, it was really interesting to me as he was very clearly a guy who was really reliant on his physical tools, that he was bigger and more athletic than guys, and that kind of was the calling card of his game. Then he goes to Kentucky, a guy who was regarded as one of the top recruits. He was either one, as I think the lowest I saw him was 5 in the national recruiting rankings, which is really impressive there. Went to Kentucky, basically got overshadowed by guys like Reed Shepard and Rob Dillingham here, who haven't really found their NBA niche as much as I expected in the short term, but obviously not counting them out yet. Then Edwards goes undrafted. The Sixers bring him in, and in the span of a month, he goes from being basically a full-scale G League player to guarding LeBron James and being fearless, knocking down threes in his face there. So what are you seeing from Justin Edwards specifically? And feel free to dive in on Ricky Council IV too if you want.
I just want to give a shout out to both of us. We've been on the Justin Edwards train since I think we first started doing this entire thing.
True.
And it's just so good to see him adapt to the NBA so well. Like, even though, 9 points last night, I think he had, it's not anything groundbreaking, but like he's already having such a great feel for the game and where he needs to be.
Yeah.
Like, I saw him making some really good passes as a ball handler, see him spotting up from three. having good defensive instincts. Granted, the one thing I would like to see him improve defensively is his screen navigation because he's a bit clunky guarding pick and rolls at the time, but overall his man defense, his awareness has all just been so seamless. Like he really just looks like he can be ready to contribute like any given night, even with the team fully healthy. And I did say on Twitter, I think I said just kind of comparing to other wings that they've drafted in the past, I think he easily already has a better offensive game than Matisse Thybulle
Oh
ever
yeah.
did.
Oh yeah.
Granted, it's a little Matisse stray, but considering that 2021 Game 7, I just still haven't forgiven him for those series of mistakes. But anyways, Justin Edwards has been absolutely phenomenal. And I think a real contract should be waiting for him if the Sixers have that extra spot after the deadline because he really just is this young and like buzzing 3-and-D prospect that seems like they've always really needed, just never really got throughout the whole Embiid era. So yeah, Justin Edwards hype train continues to go on.
Yeah, and I think Justin Edwards may go his entire career fouling less three-point shooters than Matisse Thybulle ever did. So we got that on our side there. But yeah, the thing that impressed me the most about Edwards, he gets his role, man. And I think this is one of the more unique things about basketball players as a whole. Like when you look around the NBA, the guys who can just play their natural game, it's a very, very select few. You have to be the elite of the elite to be the star of a team and be playing the way that you see fit. More often than not, you kind of fill in a lane that you're either, if you're a big man, you're going to screen and roll, you're going to block shots, and you're going to rebound. There's a clear archetype and style of play that 3-and-D wing players can be, and that's exactly what Edwards is embracing. I was kind of impressed. I got a chance to talk to him at the Rump Classic this summer, and that was one of the things that he kind of harped on is he's like, I want to become a defensive first guy. Like that was very clearly the top of the focus, and you don't hear that a lot from rookies. Like that's not kind of the mindset for a kid that's just 19 years old, kind of figuring things out and, ready to step into the professional world for the first time. So I was impressed by that, and the actions are speaking louder than his words as we're seeing the way that he's embraced it on the floor. He's still got some growing pains. There's no doubt about it. I think there's been a couple moments where like he's got the ball at the end of the shot clock and hasn't really had a clue what to do with it. There's a lot that's been thrown on his plate very quickly. This guy's on a 2-way contract and he's now started back-to-back games at the NBA level. So not going to be too hard on him for any of that, but shout out to him. And I guess to contrast that here, that probably Justin Edwards knowing his role is probably my number one critique of Ricky Council IV here. Is that is a guy who does not understand the box that he fits in whatsoever. Now, with that being said, Ricky's bringing something to the Sixers team. He's all effort, he's all energy, and he does make things happen when he's on the floor. When looking at Ricky, what are you seeing from his recent stretch of play? It's been kind of inconsistent in what his opportunity has been. And what is kind of, I guess, the long-term goal as far as what role do you see for him on the Sixers team?
First of all, I just want to say I think something that has gone almost completely unnoticed in this stretch. I don't have the exact numbers, but it seems like he's shooting really well from three these past few games. Like I think
Still looks
the past
weird.
few games like
Still looks weird to
yeah,
me,
like
but
3 of 5, 1
yeah,
of 2. But like if it looks weird and goes in, I mean
sure.
I'll take it. And he's just really been he looks a lot more confident shooting from those corners. But overall, Ricky Council has just been given that like the Sixers the energy boost that has really fueled them throughout this win streak. I know I keep talking about energy and consistency, but that's really what the Sixers have just shown throughout all these games more than anything. And Ricky Council, I mean, he's almost like a young Kelly Oubre Jr. in the way he just kind of steamrolls to the basket to try to finish over people. Granted, he really hasn't shown much progress in terms of playmaking, but I feel like his defense has been a little bit better as well. I think he's still, very much a prospect, but Ricky Council, I mean, he's been really solid in these past few games. Personally, I think he is still a bit of a weird fit, especially on a team with contending aspirations. So I might get heat for this, but if it's the trade deadline and you see an intriguing target, I think it could be a possibility to just sell high on him for whatever you get in return. But if there's not like an offer like that, of course I would keep him around because he's on a very team friendly deal. Still has loads of potential to be maybe an impactful guy off the bench, but like he has his skill set is still very much a work in progress, like you said, and it really doesn't fit the modern type of NBA, especially on a team where he's not going to be the first or second option.
Yeah, no, I do agree with that, and I think that honestly should be something these Sixers entertain. And shout out to Nick Kershaw, who'll be quite upset about this in the chat, but he also comments, it's a crime if Ricky never competes in the dunk contest. Do agree with that sentiment.
Oh yeah.
He absolutely could win a dunk contest at the NBA level. Some of the ones he breaks out in-game are insane there, but do agree with your overall sentiment that the best case scenario as far as the situation for Ricky specifically is when he can play through his mistakes and do some of his weird stuff in the way, like even last night, play. There was one shot particular that he went up with that he just had no business driving with like four guys on him. And you got to take the good with the bad. Again, he does make things happen. He is all energy, and that's been something the Sixers team has needed. So I'm not going to be too hard on him there, but will be interesting to see how that plays out. Now, to take a little bit more of a step back and look at the Sixers team once again, we kind of have had the conversation throughout about them kind of shifting into officially going for it this year. They have won 4 straight. The next handful of games, and we'll just stick up to the trade deadline. So the next 4 against Denver, and all these at home, by the way, against Denver, against the Celtics, against the Mavericks, and against the Heat. What is your record prediction for those 4 games? And take me through anything you want to get into, Jacob.
I think if we're being very realistic, 2-2, but optimistic, 3-1. Denver, I think, is an interesting one because they just had a game against the Knicks last night where they really just lacked any type of physicality defensively. And with how poorly Michael Porter Jr., Jamal Murray, and Nikola Jokic have been on the floor defensively together, I think Tyrese Maxey may have a field day tomorrow against that unit. I don't know. I think it could go either way. I could definitely see the Sixers riding this momentum and winning their 5th straight, but I could also see I don't think it's going to be as bad as the other Denver matchup from a few weeks ago because that was just ward. But I could definitely see a world where Denver does a similar thing, kind of handles them. So I think that game's a toss up. And if Embiid plays, it'll add a whole other element to it. Still, even if Embiid plays, I think he'll be rusty. So I don't think that would be like the fact that would like make me completely change my mind. But yeah, I could see that being a very competitive game tomorrow. Celtics, unfortunately, I just don't see the Sixers beating them 2 times in a row.
Yeah.
As much as I would love to see it happen, because the Celtics, they look like they're finding their groove again after a bit of a shaky stretch this month. They handled the Bulls pretty soundly last night. Mazzulla ball looks to be working again, so I think they're gonna, turn things on again pretty soon. The Mavericks are a very short-handed team right now. But like the Sixers, they've been short-handed, but they've been showing a lot of fight. Like they've been keeping games competitive. They've been staying afloat without Luka, and Kyrie looks to be returning back to form after dealing with some injuries. So I could see them handling a team like Dallas, but also wouldn't surprise me if they were very competitive as well. And what better team to play before the deadline than the Miami Heat? Oh my Lord, that's going to be a fun one. I think the Sixers handle business there, to be honest. I think that's my one lock of a win. But overall, I see them beating Dallas and Miami and losing to Denver and Boston.
Okay, I like it there. I'm gonna go 3-1. I think they beat Denver, Dallas, Miami. I do agree with you. They lose to Boston. But one of the takeaways that I will point out here: no team is perfect on an every night basis, and I think we've seen this from the Celtics team of late. Jaylen Brown, haven't been overly impressed with his level of play. I think there's been some concerns there, and even look around the rest of the league. We're finally seeing the Cavaliers come back to earth a little bit. That they dropped 3 consecutive games, so no team is perfect, and I think that should be kept in mind when stacking up, seeing how high the Sixers team can climb there. But we'll see. It is going to be a telling stretch. I would say their actions at the deadline are going to be more telling than what the results are on the floor as far as what is the future or the belief in the Sixers team. But overall, I'm excited that we have a little bit of a positive buzz. So that's about all I want to get into tonight or today, Jacob. Anything else that you want to touch on before we sign off here?
I did take the time in the last 20 minutes to think of some trade targets. So
Okay.
to end this off, I'll leave you with some names. The Atlanta Hawks, Jalen Johnson. Obviously, I think it's season-ending injury, so it just doesn't make sense for them to buy. I think selling is the best course of action for them. So potential few guys. I think Keaton Wallace is one that nobody is talking about. He isn't really getting too much usage, but he's really shown to be a solid two-way point guard who can, shoot the three, be a pesky defender, and play make a little bit. So I don't think he'd be too, expensive. I think Garrison Matthews is also a guy you maybe get for like a late 2nd round pick.
Like him.
He's been solid shooting from beyond the arc, just kind of another additional wing who can shoot. I mean, who doesn't want that on a contending team? Then you look at teams like the Jazz. Their contracts are a little bit too much for the Sixers to give, but if there's one guy that's interesting, also another wing who could shoot the ball, Svi Mykhailiuk. I mean, he's really had an under the radar solid season from beyond the arc. I watched their game against the Blazers, I think like a month ago. He was just raining threes, and I'm just imagining his fit next to Embiid and Maxey. It looks pretty solid, and these are all guys who you could probably get for a 2nd round pick. Maybe you throw Reggie Jackson at match salary. Maybe on a little bit of a steeper side, 2 former Sixers I'm actually very interested in on the San Antonio Spurs. 1, Charles Bassey. 2, Juju Champagnie. They've both
excellent.
Champagnie's been amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he's a little bit on the less realistic side, but like we said, the Sixers have the capital and assets to get him. But Bassey is interesting because all throughout the Spurs this season, the backup center position has been a bit of a controversy. They really haven't had that guy who can be reliable, especially if you've watched any Spurs games, seen how rocky the non-1B minutes are. And I think Bassey, maybe if you could give them Drummond, I would definitely welcome that because Bassey, like we've seen with the Sixers, he's really like an energetic guy, like a Dembona, who kind of gives you more defensive versatility and is a little bit more polished just because of experience. So I think, having a mix of Bona and Bassey would be very interesting to back up Joel Embiid, and it also gives them, more youth as well. So I think Mamu is that Sandru. I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name. He's also a solid forward. There's also Jay Sean Tate. Like there's options. It just depends on how much the Sixers want to spend or if they just want to, stay put.
Yeah, some good names there. And I would say Bassey's probably one of the more like stereotypical, what you get as a big man center that he'll do the basic things there. Also love Krishak, I think is how you say his name on the Hawks there.
Mm-hmm.
He has really jumped out to
Oh
me.
yeah, forgot about him. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a guy. He's a name that I've had my eye on a little bit, but I do like where your head's at there. Garrison Matthews is a guy who I think a lot of these players is interesting. Like when you look at some of these bottom feeder teams, there are guys that I think could straight up help contenders, and you named a lot of them there. So do like the names there, Jacob. Before we fully wrap up here, what else you got going on? That you're obviously still cranking out on your Substack, Sixers Country. Anything else that you got cooking up?
I got one more quick trade thought.
Hit me.
I don't know if we do this show after the trade deadline or before the trade deadline, but if Vasa Micic is a Sixer, I might lose my sanity. I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm just he is a very Daryl Morey type of trade move because I think he's making $7 million. He's on an expiring contract.
I like him.
He's a facilitating guard, but his shot selection is terrible. I think last time I checked, he's averaging like I don't know, like 7-ish, 8-ish points and like 44% true shooting. That would be an experience. But anyways, in terms of what I got going on, I do have probably an exciting announcement later today about where I'll be continuing to write for the Sixers. So I'm very excited about that. Sixer Country just popping out updates as usual, games, scores, all that. And Twitter, just usually yapping about the team. So that's pretty much all I got going on right now.
Hell yeah. Well, appreciate you hopping on with me today. Make sure you're following Jacob on all his platforms and stay tuned for that announcement coming. Sixers Country, one of the best follows on Instagram, period, as well as all that he does on Twitter. Always nice chatting up, Jacob, and happy that we got a little bit more positive tune to speak about today. Appreciate each and every one of you guys hanging in the comments and watching this video. Make sure you smash that subscribe button if you have not already. Drop a like on this video here. Me and Jake will be back chatting next time, probably after we see the full direction of this team and what their full roster will be heading into the second half of the season.